Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Timothy Adon, composer by day, gamer by night, and welcome to another video talking about Reaper. Last time I did a first look where I looked at it with basically no knowledge of what to look for at all. Just kind of doodling around, figuring out what all the buttons did without looking at any of the documents, without looking at any other people that had used it before. Basically just seeing what I had seen on the website. So today, it has been... Oh, what does Reaper say? Reaper says that I have had this downloaded for 37 days. I've opened it 40 times for a total of 28 hours and 38 minutes. Before I dive too far into how Reaper works, I just want to state something again that I mentioned in the last video that I did talking about Reaper. First off, it doesn't cost a whole lot. If you get the discounted license, which is basically just limited to $20,000 a year of gross revenue, it's $60. And that is incredibly inexpensive. And then even the commercial license, which then gives you limitless possibilities, is $225. And don't get me confused. These are the same exact software. There's no differences between the two of them. The only difference is the license. The other thing I need to mention, that's a big selling point for Reaper, is the updates and the amount of UI control that the user has. So first off, updates. Once you purchase it, you own it forever, and you get all of the updates that appear. And the updates are generally suggestions by users in the forum. So if a bunch of people suggest a feature and enough people want it, then it will probably end up in Reaper. So if you purchase it, you end up with a little bit of power in the way that Reaper may work in the future. And then the other thing, which I will actually be talking about once I open Reaper back up, is the way that users can modify the user interface and all of the action settings, the macros, etc. But that I'm going to get into now looking at Reaper. If you have the trial version, you get this screen. It's like a mandatory 6 seconds of actually looking at the screen, making sure you read everything. It does even say it's reasonably priced, but it's a 60-day free trial. 60 days. Most DAWs, I think, only give you 30, 31, thereabouts, 1 month. So you can definitely try it out. So first things first, between my primary DAW, which is Sonar Cakewalks Platinum, and this DAW, being Reaper, obviously, there is not a whole lot different as far as general music functionality. My primary uses for my DAW are for composition and sound design purposes. I don't do a lot of music recording, and I certainly don't do much in the way of videos. So as far as that's concerned, there is not a whole lot different. Most of this track here that you see, I did part of in Sonar, and then I transferred the MIDI data over here to Reaper and continued it, and ended up doing, and I ended up doing the rest of this here. So it was probably around 30 seconds long in Sonar, and now it's about 2 minutes long here. So I increased the length by around 1.5 minutes. And although I like some of the things that they do difference-wise, like for velocities, they give you a preview of like as you're changing the velocity, which I think is very cool. That's very useful. But in the end, writing music, very much almost exactly the same as doing it in Sonar. For audio recording, which I'm not going to have in this particular project file, but I'm going to load up another project file in a bit. Audio recording, obviously, exactly the same. Not really anything different. Not anything that I care about anyways. Some people might say something different. And then the other things to mention, routing. So It's very easy, unlike in Sonar. Actually, I can go over there right now. So if I wanted to route things differently, I could route this out to any of my buses, and I could have any of my current inputs go into this track. And then over to my buses, I could have these send, or yeah, have it send data to any of my other tracks. It's very basic. It's not really like totally inconsequential. For Reaper, you can route your individual tracks however you want. So you can send the audio data to any other track that you want, whether it's a bus or another track. You can have it receive data from any track, and you can send to any output that you want, receive from any input. So if you felt like building up complex layers of this is sending to this, which is also sending to that, but then that is receiving from these things, and etc., etc. So you can create a complex web of routing if you really wanted to. For me, it's not really all that necessary given what I do. But I imagine that for a really big project, especially if you're doing studio recording as opposed to composition and sound design, you could probably find some really good uses for that. The other thing to talk about is effects. Let's open this up. Okay. So it opens up effects like this. You can search for them, which is very nice, and you can sort them by different types. Let's see. I want to do just the Cocos plugins. So it comes with a large array of built-in VST plugins that come in Reaper, which are pretty cool. You've got your standard compressor, MIDI controlled delays, EQs. You've also got a surround mixer. I think this reverb is a, let's just open it. Yeah, is a impulse response reverb. But then you have other effects. You've got a actual tuner in case you needed to tune your instrument or what have you, or especially useful if you are programming a synth. You can plug this in to tune your synth if you wanted to get a little bit more of a precise creation when you're done making it. And then you also have the repitch, which is a pitch shifter, much like the one that Sonar comes with. It's, from the looks of it, I haven't actually used it myself, but from the looks of it, it seems much more easier to use than the built-in pitch shifter that Sonar comes with. Not Melodyne, mind you, the actual plugin pitch shifter. For that is good, but it's a little bit of a pain in the butt. So one of the things I do want to talk about is how easy it is to time stretch certain sections of a track. So here I have a recording of a small creek down the street from where I live. And I am going to time stretch it in an awkward fashion. So I haven't really played around with this much. I learned about it recently and haven't really needed to use it. However, doop. Stretch marker. Add stretch marker at cursor. So currently doesn't do anything, but we drag it in, and it'll stretch everything in this area, basically behind the cursor. And we can stretch it more. And that has a significantly more noticeable effect to the point where you probably wouldn't want it. But, you can keep going with it if you wanted to. And you see why you would want to. Because now you have a really, really cool way to create awesome, awesome sound effects. So that's that. Not like a huge thing, but something that that Cakewalk doesn't actually have that I know of. At least not that easy. I can go in to a clip, and I can't do it right now, but I can go into a clip, add in little markers and time stretch in between the markers, but it's a bit more clumsy. I think I only used it back when I was originally learning Sonar X1. So it probably might have changed in Sonar Platinum, but I haven't really cared to try. But this is definitely very simple. It's just boop, plop down a marker, and then stretch it. Done. So that's definitely a nice, useful tool that Reaper has. Is it good for things other than sound design? Well, I mean, you could kind of tell how much it affected the audio. Like, stretching it a little bit, totally fine. But, and actually, because it was snapping to the beats. So 1 beat's worth of time stretch, it was okay. It sounded all right. But then 2 beats of time stretch, and all of a sudden it just went nuts, and it completely. If you were trying to keep the integrity of the audio, it wouldn't work. So it's useful, not great, but it's fun to have. It's better to have it than not at all. All right, so I'm kind of going against my notes a little bit. Next thing I'm going to talk about is going to be rendering. In general, rendering is the same as basically everything else. It does have the capacity for MP3 rendering, sort of. It requires that you download an external third-party majig in order to get that working. I never bothered because I have Audacity and I can just render as a wave and then render as an MP3 through Audacity. So I don't like downloading third-party material if I can avoid it. But that's not the important part. The important part, once I doop 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 doop. The important part, so I have 2 different recordings here of 2 different streams. Nice and quiet. Nice and loud. And I can there's a couple different ways you can render. Both of them are very useful for those of us that like to do sound design. The render queue and render regions. Render regions being infinitely more cool, but I'll show you both. So render queue is file, render, and time selection. I don't actually have a time selection, but I'm going to show this to you anyways. So you can add to render queue, boop, and then you can just keep on going. And this time I am going to make a selection. And then I'm going to go again, file, render, add to render queue. Add to render queue. And then when you're done, you can open the render queue and then select as many things as you want to render, and then render selected. And it'll just render everything in one go. So it lowers the number of things that you need to do. Like if you had 6 things here in Sonar, I wouldn't be able to do that. I'd have to go make a time selection, render it. Go back, make a time selection, render it. Go back, make a time selection, blah, 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 blah. This one, I just have to make a time selection, add it to the queue, move on, add it to the queue, move on, and then render it all in one go. But that's not the way I like doing it either, because that's still, the only difference is the time spent rendering. So instead, something that's even cooler, see if I can remember the keyboard shortcuts. I don't think I can remember the keyboard shortcuts. All right, let's go time selection. Shift R for region. There we go. And then edit the name. So let's just say quiet. Actually, no. I'm actually going to... No, I'm not. Quiet water. Hit OK. Move on over to here. Select this. Shift R, Shift double click, noisy water. And that's the other thing. I'm using some keyboard shortcuts, and that's going to be very important soon. But for now, I'm still going to talk about rendering. So I have these two regions, quiet water, noisy water. I'm not actually going to name these name those that, but for the purposes of this, we're going to render region render matrix. Right. I need to actually open that. View. Grouping matrix? No. View. No. View. Region render matrix. Okay. So you open up the render matrix and go, I want to render both of those. Then you go to render, region render matrix. I have two regions and two files that I am currently rendering. And then I go over to wildcards and I say, I want these things to be named after the region. And because I want to delete these quickly because I don't actually want these files, and then I hit render. And then it'll render both files with the name of the region that they have. So I will have a file called quiet water and noisy water on my desktop. And so if you're doing like processing sound effects and have 20 of the same sound effect, so say I had a bunch of quiet waters, I can go render region and region number, because then I can have the name of the region, the number of the region, and be able to keep track of everything without having to then rename every file, which is also really annoying to do. So that, I think, is probably one of the coolest things that I've seen in Reaper so far, being that I do a lot of sound design, and a lot of that is naming things very repetitively. So that's probably the coolest part. Unfortunately, I found it out after I had processed a crap ton of chicken sounds. One last thing about the render regions is that one other thing that's useful for it's not just useful for it's not just useful for sound design, it's useful for music as well if you've got multiple tracks in the same project. So if you're currently in the process of rendering a whole album, and you have, like, say, 11 songs on that album, you can create 11 render regions with the names of those songs on there, and then you could have the region name for the track name as well as the region number for the track number, and then you'll have your entire soundtrack exported individually by region and by track, like automatically for you. All you have to do is create the render regions and do it right, which isn't hard. So that's that. Next thing I'm going to talk about are just a couple little things. One, you saw me do this already, I think, or maybe I did this behind the scenes. I don't remember. But this is a clip volume specifically for this one clip that I have here. Reaper has a couple things that are very similar to how Sony Vegas works, for those of you that use Sony Vegas. And by that, I mean that you can individually adjust clip volume by dragging from the top. And that's very cool. It's very useful. It's very quick. It's very efficient. And then the other thing is automatically crossfading, which I know a lot of DAWs do that, but Sonar doesn't, so it's kind of exciting for me. In Sonar, in order to crossfade, you have to actually individually manage the fade areas yourself, which is a little annoying, but it's manageable. So those are both very cool things about Reaper as well. Kind of minor, but needed to be mentioned. And then I've got one last thing to talk about before I talk about the last thing, which is probably the most important thing. So the first thing I want to talk about, actually I guess I got a couple things I want more. First thing I want to talk about is the Quick Start Guide. Not a fan of the Quick Start Guide. So if you go to Help, Documentation, Reaper Quick Start. It's this little PDF document right here, and it's kind of cool, I guess. It's mostly I suppose the way that it's a quick start guide is that it easily finds all of the keyboard shortcuts for you. So like how to render, where your plugins might be, how to navigate using all of the various keyboard shortcuts. So it's essentially, it's a quick start guide in that it helps you find a few things, but mostly keyboard shortcuts. And that's fine. For me, and I mentioned this in the last video, as a gamer, a quick start guide is like learning how to play a game, but without some of the rules. You know, just the simple rules. And this doesn't really do that for me. It's not telling me all of the basics that I need to know. It's just telling me keyboard shortcuts. It's, I guess to keep the analogy of board games, it's telling me where to find the rules with page numbers, but not actually telling me an easy way to play the game, leaving out the advanced rules. So that's kind of what issue I have with the quick start guide. And then the other thing I want to mention before I talk about the most important thing, the user guide is very useful, and it is very much like a rule book. Like, it doesn't have a set of rules, but it gives you all of the information, literally all of the information you need in a nice little handy area. And it is very in-depth. I think it's even more in-depth than the Sonar documentation, which is hard to navigate on its own. But the thing about user guides is, well, at least for me, in my case, I'm very much a stereotypical guy. I don't need instructions. I can figure it out myself. And that's what I did. In fact, I only started reading the user guide recently. So, you know, I didn't get nearly as much information as I could have. But luckily, a lot of the information is really not useful to somebody like me anyways. Which leads me to the last thing that I am going to talk about for Reaper, and probably the most important part. And that most important thing is the keyboard shortcuts, and rescript, and actions, all of which kind of go hand in hand. So, let me show you actions. Show action list. This is the action list. This is where you create or modify keyboard shortcuts. Let's just do that. And this ends up becoming super duper important. And is talked about a lot, and is probably one of the selling points for Reaper at all, is the ability to basically do whatever you want with keyboard shortcuts. The keyboard shortcuts end right there, and that's like a tiny, tiny, tiny portion down the list. And you still have all of these things that you can do. So, you can set keyboard shortcuts for anything you want using any keys, any combination of keys, any combination of mouse buttons and mouse wheels, as well as any combination of external devices like your keyboard. You can just use control devices as keyboard shortcuts if you really wanted to. And this is very important. And then this leads to the next thing, because obviously everything has keyboard shortcuts. Like, Sonar has keyboard shortcuts. I don't use them because I'm a dummy, but it does have them. But the other thing that you can do is macros for this. And you can assign the same keyboard shortcut to multiple things. So like I could press A and have it trigger several different things at once. That's called a macro, for those of you that don't know what that is. It's essentially a macro is a set of actions that you only need to go to one place for. I definitely could have explained that better, but essentially, say if I wanted A to split something, I could have it. I could have A be set the now time marker to the mouse location, and then split the location. Because like Reaper, you have to move the now time marker to where you want to split, and then hit S to split. If I wanted to, I could set up an action or a macro in the action list to have S be set the now marker time to where my mouse pointer is, and then split, so that I wouldn't actually have to move my hand an extra couple millimeters in order to move the now time meter. But you kind of get the point. You can set up very complex, like as simple or complex macros as you want using this system, and that becomes very important because from what I can tell, the heavy users of Reaper love doing that. It is probably their favorite thing to do, to just hit a few keys and bam, everything's done. Everything that, could have taken around 20 clicks now instead takes a few keyboard shortcuts. So that is something that is very important. It's not important to me because I am a very analog kind of person and I like going around and just clicking things. That's kind of what I do. I don't use... this is the kind of person I am. I don't use bookmarks. I like to type the things into the browser address area. And so that's the actions and macros. And that becomes very important. That's a very important selling point. Leading to the next thing, which is Rescript. Rescript is the ultimate ability to modify this software basically however you want. And that's also here under the action list. And Rescript is essentially the ability to bring in scripts from, what did they say in the documentation? I think it was Lua or Python, and I think there was probably something else. If you are decent at programming in those areas, I'm not. I barely know C#. Then you can customize the UI, you can customize actions however you want, and basically turn Reaper into the kind of digital audio workstation that you want it to be, without, the need of the developer actually having to do it for you. So if there's something that you wanted to add to Reaper that doesn't exist, you can do it yourself if the developer is not going to do it. Or you can try and do it better, whatever. And that's probably the ultimate selling point for Reaper. In fact, if you go onto Reaper's website, one section of their website has what is essentially mods. Most of them are themes, so color themes, quality of life mods, essentially. Nothing that really fiddles with the programming too much. Mostly just aesthetics. But you've got themes, custom actions, more plugins, effects chains, key maps, straight up projects, reverb impulses. It is a very moddable DAW. So if you take any video game that has like a Steam Workshop, capability so that players can go into the programming and mod whatever they want, that's Reaper. It has its own quote-unquote Steam Workshop. It's not quite as extensive as game mods that completely change how the game plays, but I'm fairly certain that if you're good at programming, you can do that. Now, the important thing to talk about, since I'm basically finished talking about what important features are, is whether or not you should get it. And my thought is, if you don't have a DAW, get it. Like, just straight up. If you're not currently using a digital audio workstation, just get Reaper. Because if you're not making a whole lot of money right now, $60 is really inexpensive. And you're getting everything that basically any other DAW can do, with the addition of a lot of control if you feel like you should need the control. It's missing a lot of built-in things. Like Sonar comes built in with more plugins than Reaper does, and it comes built in with region effects, which Reaper does not, that I have seen. And like other DAWs come with a lot more than Reaper does. But Reaper is a lot more open-ended because it's constantly getting updates, and most of the time for other DAWs you need to pay for those updates, whereas for Reaper the updates are free. So that's very important. If you are making more than 20 grand a year using Reaper, then it's going to cost you $225, which is expensive, but is still cheaper than almost any other DAW that exists. But at that price range, though, especially if you're making money, you might want to start thinking about functionality and if it works for you, which you can find that out by taking the 60-day free trial. If you do know how to program, especially in Python, then you can take Reaper to whatever level you want to take it to. And that's super important. So if you can make it the DAW that you want, then that makes it more worth it to you than almost any other DAW. But if you already have a digital audio workstation, unless it's got something that you really want, like the customization, you don't really need it. Because as I said, it does everything that other DAWs already do. It can record, it can compose, you can do sound design with it. And again, where the differences come in is what it comes with. So I won't be picking it up, at least yet. I probably will pick it up someday, because having more than one digital audio workstation is not a bad idea. And I definitely think that the person that designed Reaper has a good idea going, being very open-ended and very community-friendly. So definitely one to keep an eye on. Don't take my word for it. It's got a 60-day free trial. Try it out yourself. And given that my primary DAW is Sonar Cakewalk, if you want to be able to compare the two that I've been comparing Reaper to, if you want to compare using the DAW that I use, that I've been comparing Reaper to for this entire video, download Sonar's trial and try that out as well. That way you can be able to not just hear my words, but be able to experience them as well. So I hope this video was helpful for you, and I hope it was informative at least a little bit. If you have any suggestions, feel free to comment. And if you have any other digital audio workstations you'd like for me to try out, let me know. I will definitely be doing another one of these with another DAW at some point in the future. I'm not sure which one, though. And until next time, I will talk to you later. Bye-bye!